really honored to be here. Thanks to the Human Rights Foundation, my friends Thor and Gary for inviting me. Really humbled to be part of this community. And as what we heard before the break from Charlie Chaplin as a dictator, actually, he mentioned how the radio and the airplane were bringing the world closer together, and really said that technology, calls for the best in human nature and really should bring out the best in us. I do find that inspiring. It's a little bit difficult 80 years later to see everything we're seeing right now and what's going on in the world and listen to him say that and just say, how could you still be optimistic? But I think there really is a lot going on with technology that does cause us to be pretty optimistic right now. And I live in Silicon Valley, where we're lucky a lot of really talented and passionate people come from all over the world to try to solve problems. And I wish more of those people could be here today to see this, because I think these problems are just even so much more important than you realize sitting there back in Silicon Valley. But there are a lot of ways in which we can contribute to this. And some examples of some of the things that we've been working on. There's problems where in Nigeria, as you guys probably know, all sorts of money was embezzled from the different AIDS groups, and money was supposed to be going to help people, instead went to the government. In Kenya, the president of 20 years stole trillions of dollars that was supposed to be helping hundreds of thousands of people. In the Philippines, local government officials were caught embezzling money from the budget to do for themselves. There's hundreds of people who get caught at this. There's probably thousands around the world who are doing this. This is a constant problem, and there really are ways in which we can be addressing this. Like right now, governments around the world are spending trillions of dollars. They've become less and less efficient over the last decade or two. So we're spending more and more money in government, and governments are just consistently, historically, they're always opaque. They're poor at measuring themselves. They struggle to improve. And there's lots of ways in which government needs to improve, but fraud and corruption are a huge part of that, and it's very often tied to these issues that we're dealing with. And obviously, you don't need to be told there's corruption all over the world. This isn't a small problem in any one place. And so to give a more specific example on how we address it, if you have a typical NGO and it goes into Africa, a lot of NGOs are great, don't have any of these problems, but a lot of them will be granted money by US aid. Local employees will steal money. They're supposed to go to construction, food, and for profit. Officials on the ground will try to bribe local officials in order to get in somewhere. That's very, very common. Because they catch them doing this, they say, okay, we're going to send in a Westerner to fix it, to monitor corruption in the area. And then the Westerner themselves, submits fake invoices and embezzles money, and the NGO closes down in the area. And stories like this happen all of the time. And obviously, there's the story above just an example, but those are from cases that we face all the time. And not only that, but when this happens, it's propping up all these regimes all around the world, because all this money is going in and it's going to the corrupt people. It's letting them do the things we're seeing them do. And it turns out that if we had transparent processes enabled by data-driven systems, we can really help prevent a lot of these types of abuses. And so imagine if you took technology and you collected open data on all these different inputs, which we now can collect data on for the first time, really. This wasn't really possible even 10, 20 years ago. I think with a mobile ecosystem and with modern technology in the cloud, it's possible to collect data on all the food shipments and payments, all of the NGO and government accounting to see what's happening, collect data, do background checks on all the aid workers, every exchange transaction, report it, know exactly what exchange rate transactions are happening with all these organizations, all the local partners and records and people you're giving money to, you should track. There's all sorts of other things. One of the ones I'm most passionate about is actually the government officials' wealth and assets. I think if you're going to qualify for aid and you're going to be running an area, every government official needs to have their wealth and assets tracked transparently and openly, because it's otherwise you just know that that's where it's going. And that's something we can do right now, and yet we're not demanding it at all. So imagine we collected all the open data on all of that. I think it would make a huge difference by using that and by exposing that in the right way. And this is also something that I really care about, I think, because of the culture that we accidentally create in these areas when we go in and we try to help them. And when you go in and you allow that kind of graft, you tolerate that kind of graft without the transparency, then what that means is a lot of the rich people are people who got rich by stealing. And I think that really destroys these cultures, because what you really want is you want people to look at people who build wealth as those who worked hard and as those who are part of building a sustainable economy. And you only really have that if you get rid of the graft. And there's all sorts of different ways in which we need to end up connecting governments. The fraud is just one part of it. I think a big part of a lot of these problems in the world can be, and again, I want to step back and say, I don't think technology solves these problems. I think there's a lot of other, I think it's important to have the right humility. I think there's a lot of leadership and a lot of humanity we need, and there's a lot of things I have to learn from this community. But I think there's a lot of these problems can start to be addressed by seamlessly sharing some of this information between all these different pieces of the governments. And there's things we're already doing in the U.S. and the West that hopefully we can learn how to apply to these regions. The big challenge we face when we go into governments in general right now is most of them still run off of legacy systems, so it's harder for us to deploy these things. And this is the problem that'll get a lot easier over the next 5 or 10 years, hopefully. But right now, you have a lot of paper records still. You have software mostly from the 1970s and 1980s that we're just starting to be able to upgrade. And then, of course, you have the typical infighting. Whenever you go in any governments at all around the world, at least the ones I've dealt with, there's always multiple departments that are all fighting with each other about how to do it. One thing I've noticed also, we worked a lot in the intelligence community with my first company, Palantir. A lot of things that are called classified actually really are corrupt, and that's something you have to watch out for in these areas. Like you shouldn't allow something to be just because it's classified doesn't mean it shouldn't have some kind of oversight. That's a very common issue in all of these countries. And so I think one of the insights that we realized is the processes of government itself has to be built into technology. So it's not just putting the data in, but anything the government's doing with this data, with the processes in which you're interacting with the government, that has to run over the technology. So actually building the budgeting processes into the technology, making all the platforms provide context and to run the governments off of them makes this stuff work a lot better. In the US, where we have been able to put some of these things onto the cloud, you've instantly saw obviously a huge amount of money savings as well for these departments, as well as obviously making it harder for people to do these things. And when you talk about these processes, obviously the processes require standardized data as well. Maybe it's getting into a few too many details here, but there's things in governments called their charts of accounts, which need to be standardized. If you're going into a region, I think that's one of the first things we should do is work with the governments to standardize all their charts of accounts, and so they can be compared to each other. If you can't compare them, you can't figure out where the fraud is, basically. There's all sorts of other things, such as historical vendor rates, tax revenues, various types of records that you need to be able to standardize to make this work. And ultimately, what you're going to have in a lot of these places, I think when you have this solution, is something like a unified cloud data platform that has the standard processes, has all the data in one place, and it makes this work. One of the companies that we started that actually grew out of a lot of nonprofit work is something called OpenGov. It's a for-profit company because that's the best way we know how to hire engineers and attract people. And it's a platform that gives policymakers actionable insights and allows them to do these things. We're in about 1,600 cities right now in the U.S., and I think it's something that companies like this, platforms like this, can do a lot with aid organizations and NGOs, and I really hope to start seeing more of that. One example of one of our bigger projects, a few years ago, we started working with Ohio because it was ranked number 45 out of 50 states and had a serious problem with its open data. And there's independent ranking groups, and it's now ranked first in the nation after putting all the cities and states on it in terms of making everything transparent. We were able to do it very inexpensively, and it's something we'd love to repeat elsewhere. And so, in summary, Louis Brandeis said, sunlight is the best disinfectant. And making data transparent, it helps prevent waste and fraud. I think there's all sorts of grassroots initiatives like this that are going to give officials the tools they need to change, and something we can all push for. And it also helps spur innovation faster when you do this, because by having all the data there, people can build on top of it together and can innovate. And so, I think if you're an NGO or you're involved in NGOs, you should really think about how openly you're tracking yourself and your partners to make sure you're not part of the problem, because I think people who are trying to do good accidentally end up also supporting a lot of these things. I think as citizens, it's our job to pressure our governments and our aid organizations to adopt these methods. And then, back home we talk about this, but as technologists, we're always trying to fix big industries. Government, perhaps, is the largest and most inefficient industry, and it's our job to try to work on fixing it. So thank you very much.